All right, folks, you're in for a treat with the Healthcare Unfiltered podcast. We're continuing a little bit on the theme of the maintenance of certification of the American Board of Internal Medicine, although we took a break for a week. But, as you know, a few weeks ago, the SCAI, I actually love that name, SCAI. I got to figure out how they got that. But it's a Interventional Cardiology Society came up with a statement that looked very strong against the ABIM, or at least not in support of the ABIM maintenance of certification program. I've reached out to the organization, and they have generously agreed to give us some time on Healthcare Unfiltered to chat a little bit about what that meant and what the statement is and all of the downstream effects of it. So I have the pleasure of hosting two leaders of the organization that they will introduce themselves in a little bit and to tell us a little bit about everything that transpired until we got that statement and what lies ahead. We'll start with Dr. Allison Dupont. Welcome to Healthcare Unfiltered, and maybe a little bit about you, what you do, what's your day job, and then what do you do for SCAI?
Thank you, Shadi. I appreciate you having me on. My name is Allison Dupont. I'm an interventional cardiologist at a very, very busy community practice in the Atlanta area. I do everything from structural heart to coronary to leading our ECMO program at the Northside Hospital System. And I will preface this by saying that anything that I say does not represent anything coming from Northside. Okay, just in case I forget to say that.
It's gonna be held against you in court.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, Northside is a big hospital system. It's a 5-hospital system, and I'm primarily based at our tertiary care facility, which is located in Lawrenceville, just outside of Atlanta. Extremely busy practice. I probably work on average, I would say, between 60 and 65 hours a week. That does not include my call duties. I do take STEMI and oftentimes even general cardiology call. I'm on call on average about every 4th night currently. I do cover STEMI call at some of our other hospitals as well, because we don't have enough physicians to cover those hospitals. So I am stretched very thin. I do a lot of driving between these hospitals. That's when I listen to podcasts and CME and things like that. But I enjoy. 99% of what I do is taking care of patients. So 99% of the time I am in front of a patient. I am doing a procedure on a patient. I am in clinic with patients. And only, a small percentage of the time do I spend doing any kind of administrative duties. Although I am the director of the CCU and the ECMO program at Northside, the majority of the time I spend taking care of patients and making sure they're getting quality cardiology care. I joined SCAI as soon as I finished my training, which is about 12 years ago. I finished my interventional cardiology fellowship. I went to UNC in Chapel Hill and joined the practice that I'm with now, although I'm now at a different hospital system with that practice. So I've been with the same great group of people for that entire period of time. And all of us are very like-minded in the quality of care that we give patients. But over the last few years, I've gotten more involved with SCAI as my kids have grown. I have 2 teenagers. Leading up to that, I had a lot of, it was difficult to balance work and doing things outside of work. The little bit of free time that I had as an interventional cardiologist, I spent with my kids. They were small, they wanted their mom, and I didn't have time for anything outside of work and my kids, pretty much. That was my life. And as my kids got a little bit older, I became more involved with SCAI. I have become part of multiple committees on SCAI. The first one that I joined was the Women in Innovations Committee. So SCAI has a lot of opportunities for getting involved with all these various committees. And Hari can explain probably more about it. But the Women in Innovations Committee within SCAI has many roles, one of which is to try to attract more women into the field of interventional cardiology. We formed a mentorship committee while I was on there, which has grown into a larger mentorship program. I'm also on the communications committee. So the communications committee is responsible for communicating to all the members and also communicating outside of SCAI. And then the last thing that I'm currently involved with SCAI is the Wellbeing Task Force. The Wellbeing Task Force is a new task force that was created this year with the intention of improving physician well-being. So we all know that physician suicide rates have been on the rise. Stressors have not decreased. Stressors continue to increase. People are very stretched for time, and it's hard to make time for yourself and to feel valued, really. And this task force the whole purpose of it is to help physicians within SCAI to develop a sense of well-being. And so that just started, and I am one of the co-chairs of that committee. So that's kind of my involvement with SCAI in a nutshell.
Wow, there's a lot to digest. I'm going to come back to ask you some questions, but that's really great. Suri, do I call you Suri or do I call you Hari?
Hari's fine.
Okay, Dr. Hari Naidoo with us as well from SCAI. So tell us a little bit about you and what's your day job looks like, and what do you do for SCAI?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Hari Naidoo. I'm an interventional cardiologist, but I also spend a lot of my time taking care of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which you might recall is a heart muscle disease that causes sudden cardiac arrest in youth, athletics, and may cause heart failure later in life. I've worked at 3 hospitals. I was at Cornell first and NYU, Long Island, and then now currently at Westchester Medical Center, which is a little bit north of the city. There, over the years now, I've been the director of the cath lab. So I've been a director of the cath lab for about 17 years now at the different hospitals. And at Westchester Medical Center, which includes 3 different hospitals, I run the cath labs for all 3 hospitals. So there's a lot of administration in my role. So probably I'd say at least 1 to 1.5 days, I'm doing administration for the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy program or the cath labs as a whole, including all the quality aspects, the processes, and also taking care of all the different services that rotate through the cath lab, which in our lab includes pediatric interventional cardiology, all the types of cardiology, including TEE, electrophysiology, heart failure transplant biopsies, and we also have vascular doing all their procedures in our lab, as well as the structural program. And because it's 9 labs, we have other services that use it as well, including the pain service, vein service, and sometimes we offload VIR. So it's a lot of different stakeholders. So of course, it's a lot of administration to make sure that everybody's happy and playing well in the sandbox, which we do. I'm very proud of. Personally, I was very busy for coronary and structural. Now I've toned some of that down. I do more alcohol ablation and Watchman and coronary and STEMI columns, also STEMI call every 4th night. So Allison and I share that. I like to think that I'm busy academic practice. I publish quite a bit every year, and I'm on guidelines and whatnot, publish textbooks. But at the same time, I have a very, very busy clinical practice because of the need in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy for these patients, and the fact that we do a lot of alcohol ablations here, which you may or may not know is not something that's done routinely in a lot of different places. So that's my job. I love it. Work with some amazing people. I love having my hands in different things, from academics to teaching, to national society involvement, and to the clinical aspects of seeing patients day in and day out, which I love. Actually, when I moved from hospital to hospital, I kept my patients, which is a whole different other topic on how you're able to keep your patients despite moving through systems, which is quite tough these days. So that's my day job. In terms of SCAI, I've been really, involved in SCAI almost since the get-go. I've been out about 20 years now, and within about 2 or 3 years, I've been involved in SCAI. We had noted as an organization that is really about the person on the street. It's really the people who are the bread and butter doers in the cath lab, taking care of patients, being on call at night, and really at the ground level. And so I always enjoyed the fact that the people in SCAI really cared about patients, and patient care was always front of the center. In fact, the society started as a quality program, meaning about 30, 40 years ago, about how do we maintain quality in the cath lab? When everybody's doing these procedures, how do we make sure that they're being done well, with high volume, with good outcomes? And so initially we started as a program to educate and create ways to maintain the same types of standards, including registries. You mentioned the name. It used to be the Society of Coronary Angiography, and then when intervention came in, they added on the I, and it became cardiovascular angiography and intervention, but I love the fact that it's SCAI because people think it's SKY, but it certainly sounds cool.
I could tell you, I thought it was SKY.
I know, but we'll go with that. So it's SCAI, and then over the years, it's expanded to include structural and peripherals. And really, under the House of Interventional Cardiology, it's not just cardiologists, but also vascular. We now include surgeons in the cardiovascular space, as well as imagers in the cardiovascular structural space. So it's really more about the patients we take care of and what we do. I got involved initially because it was really an engaging society that allowed people to come in with ideas and see those ideas to fruition. So I had an idea long ago about a leadership program, and it gathered steam and has become one of the best leadership programs, I think, around in cardiology, called the ELM program. It's now in its 6th cycle. And then I was involved in the heart failure initiatives, starting as an initial heart failure task force within SCAI that grew into a whole shock program, and then a shock definition. And now we have a symposium every year on cardiogenic shock, which is quite large, all of which I've handed over. And then as I've moved on within SCAI, I've moved into a leadership position. For about 10 years, I worked in development and industry relations, which is basically how to get money into the society, do all the things we want to do for our members and our patients. And then more recently, I moved into the executive line to be president in 2025. So that's my story.
So you're incoming president, you'll assume presidency in 2025?
Yeah, so 2 years from now.
And what's your term would be, 2 years or?
Each term is just 1 year, but the way it works is you lead up. So you move from secretary to VP to president-elect to president, then immediate past president. So you're on this rotating 5-person steering committee, which we call the executive committee. And we're going to get into that because that's how a lot of these decisions are made.
And then it's an elected position, or you just nominate yourself? Like, is it an elected or selected?
So as with all societies right now, the way it works is you can either self-nominate or somebody can nominate you. It goes to a nominating committee that then looks at all the people who are nominated for all the things, including the board of trustees and also major chairs within the society, such as the annual program. And then they vet all those people, and it goes through several rounds to figure out internally with a nominating committee that includes at-large members as well as people in the executive committee. So there's input from the membership in that way. And then that goes to the board of trustees that then approves that. And then it does go out to all the members as a slate of candidates every year for their approval.
Okay.
It's a little different from the way that ABIM operates.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so Allison, did you always want to be a cardiologist?
You know, I didn't. I actually thought I wanted to do primary care until I started my residency program. And I just absolutely fell in love with cardiology. And then I told my husband, you know, I'm going to add these 3 years on, but I'll be done after that. And then, you know, it came time to make a decision regarding subspecialty. And I was like, I'm sorry, I need to do this last year because I fell in love with the cath lab. The cath lab is where all of us as interventional cardiologists are really the happiest. You know, it's fun. You never know what you're walking into when you go in there. You can plan, but each day is different. You know, there's so much to learn. There's so much changing constantly from year to year, and it's very gratifying. It's extremely gratifying.
Because you did mention how busy things are, and at least when your kids were younger, you really had no time to do anything else. And you know, the balance between family and work becomes obviously challenging. And what's intriguing is you sit on the well-being committee with this. So I'm pretty sure like you're like a case study into trying to figure this out. So you can probably bring it home in terms of using yourself as an example to help in that well-being committee. For me, as a non-cardiologist, I think cardiology, interventional cardiology, is a super busy specialty no matter what, unless you really have so many people to cover, right? Because I mean, it's an emergency. Like you can't, this is not something I'll see them next morning. How do you balance that? Like, I mean, unless you hire more people, more cardiologists, how do you do it?
I'm a mentor to a lot of younger individuals looking at this as a possible career path. And I don't really like the term balance myself. I think it's a misnomer. I don't think you can really balance. I think there's times where the work is going to take the biggest priority, and then there are times that I have a little bit more time to spend with my kids.
I love that, actually. I love that distinction.
Yeah. For your example, the summertime, we all know summertime is going to be really difficult because just like every other specialty, people are gone. You're taking call every third night or even more than that sometimes. But there are plenty of times where I've had time for my family, but I won't say it's always been very stressful, and having in the back of my mind the recertification process, not necessarily MOC in particular, but when I recertified, for example, in 2019 and 2020, my kids were still middle school age. They still wanted me around. Now they're teenagers, so they don't really care so much. But it was very stressful because trying to find enough time to spend with them and yet also prepare for this exam, it takes a toll on you. It really does, even if it's in the short term. So I think that the first time I did it, fine. I think that everybody needs to take a board exam when they're first coming out of training, but in follow-up, I just think that it does nothing but lead to stress. And I know we're gonna touch more on.
We're gonna get into it. I just want to make sure at least listeners know who you are as the cardiologist before we delve into the meat. Hari, did you always want to be a cardiologist?
I dabbled in different things, but at the end of the day, my dad was also a cardiologist, and he was an invasive cardiologist, and I think I definitely gravitated to how he was with his patients. He was a very, very busy clinician. And I just loved how he was with his patients and how it built very strong relationships dealing with the organ that actually people always stay with their cardiologist, generally speaking. And I really loved that. And even now, 20 years, I have patients that have stayed with me that long. So I really didn't gravitate too much away from cardiology. Interventional, I wasn't sure I wanted to do. I think I certainly didn't figure that out until I did fellowship. I initially wanted to do heart failure, and I went to University of Pennsylvania for heart failure. And then during my fellowship, I fell in love with the cath lab because I guess, you don't really know if you're going to be good with your hands until you're, doing things. You also don't know if you're going to be good under stress until you're doing things. And I think interventional cardiology can be a very intimidating field if you're not sure you can handle that. And so when I was there, I think I found it to be the natural fit between what I really loved about heart failure, which was the hemodynamics, the assessing patients to understand why they're sick. I love that part of it. And so the cath lab was where I got that. And then I could take that information and make my patients better. So I loved that science of it. And I use that to this day. And so that's my main fascination with the cath lab. The idea that I can really figure out what's going on with the patient physiologically, and then use that to make us all look more brilliant.
Yeah.
So I want to start, Allison, by just talking to you about intriguing thing. I mean, you're on the communication committee, right? So there's a lot of things that happen every day. I presume there are certain things that occur that you don't need to comment on, right? I mean, you're not going to comment on every single thing that happens. You just won't have time.
Right.
I guess in the communication committee for SCAI, how do you choose topics that you feel the society must opine or offer an opinion versus things, we can probably sit this one out?
Right. Well, I will preface this by saying that the communications committee did not come out with a statement. That was made by the executive committee. So Hari will talk about that. But as part of the communications committee, the majority of the time, we're not discussing things that are controversial at all. We are publishing summaries of studies that have come out. So some of us will go to each major conference, CRT, TCT, SCAI, ACC, and then we publish snippets of the important studies that have come out, and we communicate those with all of the members. We will send out information on meetings that are coming up and try to promote them. So we're
more scientific communication.
It's usually more scientific communication. Yes, yes. There are times where we will be asked to comment, for example, if there's a study that comes out that's a little controversial in the media. Some of us will speak with the media about how that affects patient care. How does that study affect what we are doing as cardiologists? But this particular topic was 100% from the executive committee.
So, Hari, this takes me to you. I mean, same question. It's kind of like, there are lots of things happen. So something made the executive committee say, let's just tackle this on. Take me through the room where you guys were meeting and thinking, should we say something? Should we not?
Right. So to Allison's point, there's multiple committees. And so some of the things that we handle through advocacy committee or government relations committee. And so some of the things percolate that way. But for some of these bigger topics, it's more about the direction of SCAI. And so the executive committee does have to opine on it. And then secondarily, we'll bring in the communications committee or the board of trustees. So that's how it happened in this one. So we're always, priding ourselves on the fact that SCAI has always been a member organization. I think that's foremost, the torch that we carry. We're a member organization that really wants to feel that we know what's going on the street and supporting our members. And so we're constantly watching. And I think this topic of ABIM, obviously, as you know, has been going on for 10 years. I was around at that time, too, when there was an initial letter to ABIM from SCAI and from other societies that the process was confusing. This is when they had initially changed and initiated the MOC discussion. And so there was a backlash at that time, as you may recall, and the society did put forth a formal statement at that time. ABIM did also then come out with some recommendations or ways they were going to change to make it more user-friendly and fair. And since that point, I think we've been watching it too, but with this recent episode by Aaron and others, I think it brought to light that at this point it's become very confusing. And for our members has been a major thorn in their side, so to speak. And the question becomes, how do you balance an appropriate maintenance of certification or competency that's not confusing and not unduly difficult for our members? The reason why it became to a head this time is because there became confusion about certification status that seemed to be fairly whimsical, at least to our members, and also seemed to be tied to fees, but also was very confusing. And so it did not seem fair to have a confusing system that all of a sudden people would become uncertified. And the problem we saw was that this is a direct patient care problem, in that if one day you're certified and the next day you're not, and it's not clear exactly what happened, even though you're within the time frame of the 10 years of your examination, then that puts in jeopardy a bunch of things, including your patients, including your hospital privileges, including potentially your insurance reimbursement, and also whether you can teach at a hospital because it's associated with the ACGME. So that was sort of a line in the sand that I think them tying MOC to the certification status within the 10-year time frame was problematic in a number of ways that really became real. And because of that, we want to do three things with the statement. One is to address our members that we do hear, we do listen, and we believe that it's an important problem that has come to a head. Number two, that it's important for ABIM to see that we have listened to our members and feel that this is a time point for a statement for them to address. And number three, I think for the first time, because nobody had been talking about it, this whole idea that hospitals and insurance companies are watching an ACGME, and they need to know that there is confusion here. And so it is not fair to penalize physicians and patients that they see because of something that's very confusing to people. And so that part of it made us put together a statement. And the way it worked behind the scenes is there's 5 or 6 people on the executive committee. We do need a consensus, but we hash out things behind the scenes there, and we discuss it until there's a consensus, and people can bring up different topics. And obviously this was brought up by a few of us. And ultimately we decided that despite the fact that other societies had not said anything at the time, we felt it was important to say something for our members. So that's how that happened. We then drafted a statement together with staff. We have wonderful staff at SCAI, really, really top line people who are really great at what they do, very efficient and high quality. And they helped us put together a statement that we then edited ourselves, and then we pushed it out to the board of trustees as well as the communications committee. And that's because there has to be checks and balances in the system. It's important for the board to see what's going on because they are directly responsive to the members. And they are also well diversified. SCAI has almost 5,000 members in 70 different countries. It's not an American society. It's an interventional and angiography society, so it's global. So it's important that there's buy-in from the broad board of trustees and the members that they represent, as well as from the communications committee, because they are good at communicating, presumably, and we picked them for that purpose. So we don't want people out of the loop, and there should be an ability to make any comments to that. Ultimately, we went through a couple iterations, and as you may know, we don't rush on these things. It's important for a society, if we're going to make a statement, that we're going to be able to follow it up and not just make a statement and move on to the next thing, which is what happens on social media oftentimes. That can't happen in a society. If a society says something, they have to follow through. And so it was important to get all that buy-in so that this is something that we will be tracking and hopefully improving upon.
But your goal was to clarify what happens during the 10-year period when you're certified, or your goal was to say this is nonsense?
Our goal was to say that the way that they're doing this is, I don't know about nonsense, but the way they're doing it is confusing. And as a result, it becomes no longer really applicable or obvious to anybody. If your question is whether there should be maintenance to maintain proficiency, I think most people agree in various forms there needs to be something, be it CME, be it MOC, be it whatever the next iteration is. And I think that's something that we're going to have to take back and discuss within SCAI, either with ABIM or whichever direction we may want to go. But I think most people believe that you do need to have some maintenance of proficiency, but the question is who does that? How do they do that? How is it easier for people? How is it not a weed out, but rather a weed in, and make sure that people who are initially certified can maintain their certification? The goal should be to maintain everybody who was able to pass the boards the first time, because these are not people who typically get worse over time. These are people who are trying to maintain and balance their experience and their knowledge.
Yeah, and Allison, I mean, we're not saying that people should not be proficient. All what we're saying is that we can be proficient without the MOC. You're doing your CME, you're doing all of your work. I apologize to listeners if there's a little bit of an echo. I think that's probably me. But in essence, it's hard for me to believe. I just went through your background, both of you, and what you do, right? It is hard for anyone to believe that your proficiency, your capabilities, and really your ability to take care of patients is contingent on few questions every quarter. I mean, I hate to believe that. It doesn't make any logical sense, right? If you're listening to this, we just went through all what you do every day.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's not really representative through these questions. So
yeah, we didn't make a statement on their process, because we've already done that 10 years ago, and I think it was very clear that the things that they were trying to change, they really didn't come through on if we go through that. Yeah. And so I think our statement was more to put a stake in the sand, stake in the ground, that we don't think that how it's transpiring right now is appropriate.
Allison, is it, when you communicate something like this, so the executive committee comes up with the statement, I want to go through the statement in a little bit, and then the communication committee probably disseminates that, I presume, out there. Do you prepare for, I mean, are you thinking what I'm gonna, is there backlash? Maybe we should, I mean, how do you prepare for the possibilities? I kind of feel like you have to be ready to whatever is going to happen afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that the executive committee talked about that a lot during the development of the statement. We discussed that at the communications committee as well, but this topic has come up amongst us at the communications committee many times at the meetings. And we were not surprised that SCAI came out with this statement. So our job was basically to sign off on the statement, for lack of a better term, that was handed to us from the executive committee. And essentially it stayed the same statement, but became a little briefer. And then went back to the exec committee, I think, for the final iteration. But I think everybody on that committee was not surprised and was elated that SCAI was going to do this. It was a sign that the membership was being listened to, that the organization was listening and processing the feedback, and that they were standing behind what the members felt. And we were, as a membership, as someone who's a member of SCAI and not on the executive committee, I felt very proud that SCAI stood up and made this statement.
Yeah, and Suri, I mean, basically, one of the couple of things you've said in the statement, this situation unacceptably exacerbates the interventional cardiology workforce shortage and threatens to directly impact the care of patients suffering life-threatening cardiovascular emergencies. One of the things that, I mean, very strong and very powerful, and I wholeheartedly agree, we did spaces, Twitter spaces live a couple of days ago. And one of the things that I've started with is, why should the public care? Because it's like, if you're not a doctor and you're just, and the ABIM tells you, well, we need your doctor to be a good doctor. This is a way to tell it's a good doctor. What's few $100s a year? And what's few questions here and there? You can understand that the public might have little sympathy for us, right? I mean, like, these are a bunch of whiners.
Well,
yeah.
they really get the idea that, like you said, they may believe that the certification and recertification process is so robust and proven. I think that's where it becomes challenging. And so when it becomes all of a sudden people are uncertified, then it gives a false impression that the standard is much lower than what just happened. And I think that's why it was very important to make a statement now, because we don't want that what's happening with ABIM to give that impression to patients. And we do think that, as you just heard, we're every fourth night. If we lose people because they, even temporarily, because this is being hashed out, that is a problem for how we can take care of all the heart attacks in the country and the structural heart disease, the valves, and everything that we're doing. Unless the system understands that it's a fairly whimsical problem right now.
Allison, do you think the public, I'm gonna give you like a thought experiment. Like, there's one way to try to talk to a public person, a patient or a family member, about the burnout and shortage and everything. And I still think it's a little bit difficult to communicate that, because in their mind, what they are thinking, it's like, 30 questions every quarter, like every 3 months, 30 questions every quarter. That's how they're thinking, right? I mean, again, they're not living your lifestyle, and they're paying $200, $400 a year, whatever it is. That's one element of this, versus what we hear sometimes from Dr. Wes Fisher and others, which is, in addition to that, there are certain financial practices going on that may not be as, I guess, kosher as we think they should be. So which part resonates with the public more if you need to communicate and appeal to the public?
I think that it's absolutely the fact that there will be a physician shortage if we continue to let physicians get burned out. And this is just adding to everything that's already on the plate of physicians. We've got to figure out a way to keep the quality of life good. We are human beings, and we have families, and we have spouses, and we have a life, and anything that's added to our plate detracts from that. And there are so many other things besides MOC, right? We have to keep our state licensure. We have to do CME. We have to do DEA. We now have to do, there's additional requirements now, at least in the state of Georgia, for sexual harassment. We have to do several hours of that. I don't know if that's a nationwide thing or not. It's one burden after another, after another, after another. And what multiple choice test adds to determining the knowledge of an interventional cardiologist, or any practicing physician for that matter, is nothing. It just is not, it's not relevant. And so that I think is where we have to go if we want to educate the public. I don't know that educating the public necessarily is the way to go, though. I feel like we need to try as much as possible. And I think it's difficult because it's all over social media. But I think we need to try as much as possible to keep this amongst the medical community, and not make it a public issue.
Yeah. Suri, I'd like you to reflect on that, whether you think blowing this up as a more of a public issue will help or not. And I think I'm going to read the next part of the statement, which is really very powerful, I thought. It is the position of SCAI that the ABIM must immediately abandon its complex practice and stop mixing non-participation in MOC with not certified status. I think this was very powerful, very strong, very clear. Tell me the reaction. When did you expect to hear back from the ABIM, or did you expect to hear from the ABIM whatsoever? And then reflect on what Allison said, because I hear two different thoughts, to be honest. I hear one thought is, if you don't really grow it up to become this almost like a public health issue, patients are affected, families are affected, it's not going to improve. And the other school of thought is, this is a doctor's issue, needs to stay as such, and let's try to resolve it.
Yeah, let me tackle the first one first, which is that we knew what ABIM's response would be, because as a society, I will tell you, we ran it by ABIM. We had to make sure that from a legal standpoint, we did not say anything contrary to what their policies are. So we had transparency in that. We ran it by them. They sent a response back. We gave them deadlines within a day to get response back, and we re-edited it so it was consistent. Obviously, they wouldn't be happy. So when it went out, we knew what their response would be. But their response to me was still that for them, it seems not confusing, but obviously it is a confusing process. And I think there's just a disagreement on that end between the constituents and the ABIM itself. I hear what Allison's saying, and I hear what you're saying, Shadi. I think that the patients just want to make sure they're being taken care of, right? And they hear the doctor shortage, but they don't really see the doctor shortage. They do see that it takes them a long time to get a good doctor. Do they see the burnout? I don't know if they see the burnout. Maybe they felt it during COVID. I'm not sure they feel it now, because it's a very personal thing for us. What resonates with patients may not resonate, may not be the same thing that resonates with us, because they're not living in our shoes and we're not living in their shoes. So we don't really, we live in theirs a little bit more, but in general, it's hard for people to relate. They will see doctors in general as making good money. And the times they see doctors are probably out and doing things. And so people see that doctors maybe aren't as burned out. I don't know what they see, but I think the truth is this is a physician issue, right? This is how we're regulated, how we maintain proficiency and competency. We're committed to this as individuals. We're constantly reading, going to conferences, and as you know, and whatnot. And so this is, how do we balance making sure that we're at the top of our game while still being in the game? And I think that's something that physicians have to grapple with. And I think we just haven't, most physicians, and speaking as a member, have not felt as adequately empowered for that. So I would say that it's important for patients to know that this is brewing, that there may be arbitrary decision-making that takes their physician out of the running for no apparent reason. And that's important for them to know that, and not to overblow that as anything real or substantial, other than a couple questions that maybe they didn't get around to doing because they didn't see the value in them. And I think it's up to the ABIM to make sure that there's value in that. And I think the reason why this is blown up is because people feel, yes, it's only a few questions every quarter, but people are not finding the value in it. And so it just feels like they're asked to do something that is rote, that you can just look up and then move on. I listened to your podcast with Aaron. I think all of those very much resonate with me personally, as well as with Allison. I think that's where the burnout contributes. Everything else we're doing in our life seems to be fairly meaningful, and we want this to be meaningful. And so the reaction was to make sure that this process, whatever it ends up being, is more meaningful.
It's like, asking to do one more thing. I actually, in the podcast I did with Rich Barron and Aaron Goodman, I did tell Rich, I said, imagine somebody tells you do only 6 pre-authorizations a year. That's really all you have to do. Well, 6 is very, not a lot, right? But it is still a burden for you, because, you know what it entails and what it is. Allison, what the ABIM said, No physician loses certification without being notified several times about what requirements they need to fulfill in order to remain certified. I found that response pretty strange, because it's like, we're notifying, we're emailing you every week to remind you. What did you think of that response?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. They are emailing me on a regular basis asking me to pay them. But what I found interesting was that they said that they would not take away your certification, that it was not linked to MOC. And that's not true. I mean, I posted something on social media, I think it was last week, of all the screenshots of the emails that I've gotten. And it's, it explicitly says, if you don't pay this MOC fee, then you risk being listed as not certified. That's what it says on the email. And I had already actually I had gotten all my MOC through some CME that actually happened to be MOC also, which I didn't do on purpose, but it actually, I had met the MOC requirement, and I just hadn't paid it. So I keep getting emails saying that I'm not going to be certified. So it's just not true. I mean, they're kind of talking out both sides of their mouths, is how I think most people feel about this.
Hari, I'm trying just to think whether these statements, two things, these statements are going to make a difference. But before we get there, I have not seen the American College of Cardiology, for example, the ACC, issuing anything. Obviously, don't speak on their behalf, but you're a cardiologist. You probably have membership. I don't know if you do or not, but are you surprised by the paucity of medical organizations that have not opined on this topic? My own American Society of Clinical Oncology and American Society of Hematology have not really said anything as well. So, I mean, I would have expected that, we get an outpouring support from our societies that we have paid hundreds and hundreds of dollars over many years for membership. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I can start. I'm surprised about the non-cardiovascular societies, because internal medicine has a lot of different societies. So I am surprised that, especially after our statement, that others haven't really followed suit, at least in the statement, what they felt was going on now. I am pleased that HRS did. I think this week or last week, they came out with this. Maybe it was this end of last week, they came out with a statement. These are the electrophysiologists, similar to our statement about MOC. I can't speak for ACC, but all I can tell you is that cardiology, I think, does think very similarly. And sometimes when people are quiet, it could be that things are happening and it just can't speak as much or as fast. Even in our own SCAI, this went on for about a month. You guys were talking about this stuff online for a while, and we were reticent because as we're discussing and deliberating, that's the time where we really can't say anything. There's a quiet period where we're doing our due diligence on A, do we want to say something here? B, what is our goals? C, how will we affect change in this space? Those things are very important. And I don't know what the other organizations are doing, but I think it's possible they could be in different aspects of that trajectory.
That's a good point. I mean, it's possible they're all just contemplating the statements and legal review and things like that. Allison, what are these statements going to make a difference?
We talked about that yesterday on the podcast. I don't know. I hope that they do. It does give me a little glimmer of hope that we could see some change. I would love to see more organizations coming out and speaking their minds as well. I think the more organizations that do that, the better. But ABIM is a big enterprise and they've got their hands in a lot of things. And it's a very complicated web. And I'm not sure that just having the organizations come out and make statements like that is going to make all the difference in the world. I'd be kidding myself if I said that was going to be the difference, but it does not hurt. And it definitely helps the members feel heard, and I think that was a big step in the right direction.
Hari, what do you think? Do you think these statements, I mean, they're obviously commendable. I think there are many people on Med Twitter who are just singing your praises, and including myself. I was very happy to see this. But is this going to help?
I believe so. And obviously, I know that there's stuff that we're working on within SCAI leadership to move the needle. So I think that's all I can say right now, but I would say yes.
So anything else? I mean, with the ABI, I mean, what's going to happen, I think that there will be more information over the next couple of months. Maybe there are some new societies. I mean, the HRS you mentioned, I did actually was very happy to see the HRS statement, but then the more I read it, it was a little bit lukewarm. It was very different than yours, in all fairness. So it appeared reasonable at the beginning, but then you start reading between the lines, it wasn't as strong. But I guess, are you prepared to make additional statements? I mean, are you able to have any additional pressure, I guess? I mean, it's not clear to me how much the societies can exert pressure on the ABIM.
So there are certainly avenues that we're exploring. So we didn't make the statement in vain. So there are ways to make a process that we think can be better for our members. And we are hopeful that maybe ABIM will be that. But there are mechanisms that we're exploring.
Well, I hope to have you back on the show when we hear more on this. Allison, anything else I should have asked pertaining to the SCAI, the statements, next steps that you think listeners and viewers would like to hear about and watch?
No, I think that one thing that I mentioned yesterday when we were talking was that there's a lot of people that aren't on social media and are not really necessarily aware of what's going on. And I think some of the SCAI members that received the statement from the organization probably weren't really in the loop. So it would be good if we could figure out some way to get to those people who aren't necessarily on Twitter. It's primarily Twitter. Those of us who are on Twitter or X are having conversations, and the people who aren't, I'm not sure how much they really know about this. So I don't know how to do that. But I think it's another thing that we probably need to brainstorm, because there really is power in numbers. This petition that Aaron has circulated that has almost 20,000 signatures really does speak volumes. And I think it would have many, many more if we could reach the people who weren't on social media.
Yeah. Hari, other thoughts? Anything?
No, I think that's great. I mean, you're right. The other areas of social media are not lit up in the same way. So I do think that these types of podcasts are helpful. I'm also happy that SCAI has an opportunity to, with this topic, also bridge a little bit past cardiology into other fields, such as yours. We almost never work together, except for in the hospital on a single patient. But nationally or societally, it's very rare to work with the other societies. So actually, this is a nice opportunity, if you look at it that way, to put everybody together on a common theme. So I found that part interesting online, although it still seems to be primarily HEMONC and cardiology, primarily because of you guys and Aaron. But
yeah, I mean, the American College of Physicians have not said anything. The ACP, the American Medical Associations have not. But your point is well taken. Maybe they are thinking through the process, they're going through their own channels. And when I first did the initial debate, I really wanted to be very open-minded to both sides, because I've always said, as you moderate any type of discussion and dialogue, you must try to take your own biases out and try to provide both sides in a chance to opine. But the more I learn, the more I realize there's really not much that the other side really has in terms of this both sidism is not working right here.
It really is remarkable how this has brought so many physicians to the same conclusion. I mean, if you think about, there really is no topic in which this many physicians agree, so it's remarkable to see that. Yeah. But there's many more out there that aren't being represented. So
Drs. Allison Dupont and Hari Naidoo, thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered. Really appreciate it. And thank you to SCAI for leading the way in really offering a statement that I believe 100% of the physicians would agree with, as long as they have no conflict of interest.
Thank you, Shadi.